Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. Aston Villa didn't score a goal in August. Now they're just 3 points off Arsenal. So, are they real title contenders? Here for this one, we've got our Aston Villa correspondent, Jacob Tanswell. We've also got Liam Tharme in the studio with the tactical know-how as well. Right, Jacob, Villa failed to win their first 5 league games this season, but it's changed around since then. They've then won 9 of the next 10. They're now third in the table. What would you credit to this turnaround?
Essentially, if you want the short answer, it's Unai Emery. I remember going on this podcast back in August, September time after they drew 1-1 with Sunderland, where he called his players lazy. And at that point, you thought, oh no, this doesn't seem to be going very well. But the thing about Emery is that he's, apart from that answer, which in a few days after that, he actually regretted. He's very consistent. He doesn't get too high. He doesn't get too low. And that's the mentality that he's tried to foster over 3 years at Aston Villa. And I guess an upshot, a positive upshot of not having much money to spend in the summer is that the squad has basically stayed the same for 3 years. A lot of these players predate Emery, so they know his ways of working. There was a fear, especially in the early parts of the season, that there was physical and mental burnout, the long analysis meetings, the stagnancy really. But the fact that they all know how he works, the habits, they felt if we could get some confidence and resilience that Emery's now talked about, he said the draw against Sunderland, in retrospect, was really important for us just to stop the rot, because I'm sure we'll come on to it. The summer was so bleak. It's been described to me by senior figures as a nightmare. Only 31 million in net spend, and that kind of pervaded into early parts of the season. So the consequence and the turnaround has been incredible, really.
Yeah, from a tactical perspective, though, it's been really interesting watching this sort of upsurge. And we'll talk about, obviously, firepower, because Watkins hasn't really started the season that well, but they've managed to get it together. And I don't know whether it's a siege mentality he's created through his comments, but tactically, especially against Arsenal, they went for blow.
Yeah, I mean, they're really phenomenal at playing up in games, right? When big teams come, especially to Villa Park, their capacity to kind of raise the level individually and collectively is always there to see. And I've spoken to Jake about this before. In fact, we were at the PSG game together back in April, and we're kind of talking about various things. And there's a real standout thing of plan A always being the same with Villa. Emery always wants them, ideally in games, bait the press. It's always a similar kind of shape or formation, either some 4-2-3-1 or kind of a 4-2-2-2, where you want that left back pushing on, that left-sided number 10 kind of coming inside, getting that box midfield, really to try and overload teams centrally. And what we saw against Arsenal was a lot of them kind of setting up to play that way, and then just smashing the goal kick or the ball long from the goalkeeper anyway, and saying, okay, well, we can overload you in midfield, we can win second balls, and then getting behind nice and early. So I think the challenge there, when they don't necessarily want to be completely tactically flexible and always play kind of different ways, is saying, well, then you need to improve the quality of the players that you've got, and you need to have the depth to do that across kind of multiple competitions. There's been some interesting changes this season where, Dina's started to kind of be phased out, I feel like, a little bit, or not play that kind of first choice role. Ian Martin's come in, got some really great speed down the left. Emi Buendia now having, more of a starting role. They've got various number 10s and midfielders that can score goals from range. I think Pau Torres at left centre-back is really the key in that team. Didn't really start the season playing, and I guess my question to Jacob is, love to kind of know why. It didn't seem like he was too injured, maybe just a bit out of favour. But him as a left footer there, able to break lines, Ezri Konsa next to him, I think is a really solid partnership.
Yeah, what about Pau Torres? Why do you think he didn't start the season so well?
This is ultimately where Villa are at the start of the season. So, as we know, the mood in the camp was flat. There was, like I say, stagnancy potentially setting in. And at a point in the season, Emery prioritised defensive solidity. Tyrone Mings, unequivocally, actually was the best player in the first 3 or 4 games, because they weren't creating anything going forward. But he was key in terms of aerial duels, defending set plays. And at that point in the season, Emery basically said, we just need to stay in games and maybe nick a win, but get points on the ball, because we're so far off where we need to be. We're almost starting the season 6 weeks later, because we didn't have a pre-season. We signed 3 players on deadline day: Jadon Sancho, Lindelof, Harvey Elliott. Only Lindelof and Sancho are playing mainly Europa League. Neither of them have actually started a league game. So it was only 6 weeks into the season where Emery felt like Villa were really getting themselves under their feet again, and that's when you can start to bring in Pau Torres, improve your in-possession schemes. And also it did coincide with Tyrone Mings suffering a hamstring injury, but at the same time, Villa still aren't scoring a lot, and Liam will come on to it in terms of expected goals, and that's only really improved in the last couple of weeks. But what they have done is they've been far better defensively. I think they conceded half what they had at this point last season. So the fact that they're now improving defensively means that they're always staying in games.
They didn't have a great summer window, Jacob, and you just touched on it then. They also missed out on Champions League football. I wonder how much of an impact that can actually have on a team when you've got these sets of expectations, but actually, sadly, going into the new season, you don't manage to hit them. It might take a bit of time to reshape the mind, surely.
Yeah, definitely. I remember speaking to a few of the senior guys who were in the dressing room at Old Trafford on that day, and this is about 3 weeks after that game, and there was still overwhelming disappointment. Just the nature of defeat, really, the fact that they lost it on goal difference there, that controversial refereeing decision to blow up for Morgan Rogers' goal. Emma Martinez had got sent herself, and that came the week before the Manchester United speculation. There was a lot of things going on that day that made it quite a galling day, and that kind of went into the sun because they knew missing out on Champions League was terrible, really, to their summer transfer targets and prospects. They couldn't really sign anyone. The only players they signed were Evan Gesson for potentially up to 30 million and Marco Bizot for less than $1 million, which is in retrospect a fantastic deal, but they couldn't really strengthen. And when you lose a player like Jacob Ramsey, okay, he's not gone on to brilliant things so far at Newcastle, but he's very popular. He was a local lad, very key in the dressing room. So a lot of these players saw him going. They saw that their own futures were uncertain. Even John McGinn, who's been so good this season,
such a warrior for
signed a new
Villa,
contract.
Yeah.
Everton were interested in him. So there were so many players that had uncertain futures. So going into the season, they didn't feel settled. They didn't feel this team that Emery's built for 2.5 years that was just absolutely incredible and so consistent. They felt actually up in the air. I remember this last podcast we went on, we were talking a lot of Emery's downsides, and some of them are he's got too much control in the window. He's potentially some of his transfer targets, if he has too much authority, are skewed. He's not obviously the most personable, but what we've seen now, and this podcast is mainly about, is how good pound for pound he is at coaching and maximising these players. And in the summer, there was a feeling, could these players that he's been with for so many years improve, go up to the next level, or if they just kind of bottom him out? Now we've seen actually the likes of Matty Cash, John McGinn, they can go up to another level, which is just an indication of his excellent coaching.
Yeah, and I want to talk a bit more about that, Liam, because, Villa have the second most goal contributions from substitutes in the league, up to 9, after the substitution of Emiliano Buendia against Arsenal. Let's talk about his in-game management, because that's something I saw floating around on X a lot. He knows how to understand the ebb and flows of games and actually make those substitutions at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, he's coached at the top level for so long now, right? And across, he's been at Villa and across all 3 European competitions. So I think, playing against bigger, better teams is something he's very accustomed to. I also think it's a case that your subs are only as good as the squad depth you've got available to you, and as kind of poor as I think Villa's window might have been, they have, it feels like anyway, built a good level of squad depth, especially in forward areas, kind of those midfielders, those forwards. Last season it was Asensio and Rashford on loan as well, so there's that clear focus of having players that could impact games and change games more than anything, I think, at times through just kind of individual brilliance and quality. And I think it also helps that they've got such a clear system and kind of persisting, and this can be a negative when they're doing badly, but kind of persisting and playing that same way. Players must come on and have such a clear idea of what they needed to do and what's being asked of them. And look, he makes a lot of subs. I had a quick look at the numbers, and it's only Bournemouth and Fulham that have made more subs than Villa this season. So he's clearly very keen to kind of change games in that way. And I think there's probably a little bit of a pragmatic aspect to it as well, where it's sure partly to change games and try and get results and get points, but probably to do with load management as well, dealing with how many minutes players have got to play. They've got, European football again this season. So trying to, we can compare them to, say, Crystal Palace, who don't tend to make a lot of subs, don't make a lot of in-game changes with Oliver Glasner, and seem to be kind of suffering, and their form is now kind of going the other way from a good start this season. So it's obviously not purely down to subs, but I think it's clearly something which Emery's learned across his career is a really important part of the game.
Yeah, let's stick on Buendia right now, Jacob. A player who this season has scored some really important goals for Unai Emery, but also a player, I don't know, maybe this is just me from the outside looking in, didn't seem to be getting much game time over the last season or so.
No, his renaissance kind of symbolises Aston Villa's really this season. Let's go back to last year. He had an ACL injury 3 days after Tyrone Mings did, and started that 23-24 campaign. And unlike Mings, who they felt like, okay, he had the worst injury, he came back up to speed. Where Buendia came back, he looked so physically off it, too slow on the ball, was getting out muscled. And it got to the point where they thought, only in January, let's move him on. He went to buy Leverkusen alone with an option to buy Leverkusen, for whatever reason, just didn't play him, too much or what was expected, didn't take up the option. And then went into pre-season, and him, Leon Bailey, were that type of guys you thought, okay, Villa can try and raise some money through senior sales, really. Leon Bailey left on loan, but Emery Buendia showed something to Emery in pre-season. He looked far stronger. He looked more robust. He looked like the Emery Buendia that pre-ACL 2 years before. And he thought, okay, maybe we can work with him. But still, at that point, Emery wasn't quite convinced. He was looking at other options, other number 10 alternatives. Lucas Paquetá was obviously namely one of those. And it got to the final days of the window. Villa were actually offering Buendia out. Does anyone want him? It kind of, because Villa were desperate to bring players in. They knew they had to remove someone off the books. So they were offering Buendia out. Stuttgart were very interested in him. He really didn't want to go. He wanted to have one more shot, really, another 6 months, final 6 months at Villa. And then through luck, through getting this opportunity, through showing in certain games, he's now become this player that scores big goals, big moments, and he's been one of the first choice names on the team sheet, which is just remarkable. When only 3 months ago, he was a guy that Villa were actively trying to sell.
I've got to say, though, tactically as well, with Ollie Watkins not firing, it's quite interesting how they've managed to solve that problem of goal scoring in particular.
I think so. Jacob touched on it as well, kind of towards the top, that they've scored a lot of really good finishes, a lot of goals from distance, which is a great asset to have. I think the real test of kind of their form now is you can run hot for a period of time, kind of outperforming your expectations or kind of the quality of chances that you're creating. But if you want to be kind of a real kind of title chaser, and I know we'll come on to this, then it's about getting Ollie Watkins into those goal scoring positions again, about getting, repeatable high chances, creating tap-ins, and not always kind of scoring goals from 24, 30 yards. They need to be the extra ones and not kind of your whole goal catalogue. But that's a big part of the reason why they've done so well recently.
Yeah, can we quickly talk about Morgan Rogers as well, Jacob? Took him a while to get going, much to this Villa team this season in many respects, but he's now contributed 3 goals and 3 assists in the last 10 Premier League games. And I'm just thinking, we've got the World Cup happening in the summer, another great option for England when you think about it.
It's arguably the most competitive position in world football, is at the England number 10 spot at the moment. And the fact that he's in the conversation shows how highly rated he is by Thomas Tuchel, but also how unique his skill set is, right? We spoke about it before. He's so powerful. He's such a ball carrier. And I think at the start of the season, he was kind of a victim of his own success, actually. Teams were starting to get really tight to him, starting to frustrate him, leave a challenge on him, and really just stop him turning and driving at them the way he's so dangerous. And I think there was an acceptance from him and people close to him that he was quite loose in possession. His decision-making can be quite erratic. So he would do the hard part, and then the final pass would let him down. And it got to the point, again, only 3 months ago against Bologna, where he couldn't make a pass, it felt like, in the second half. And when he actually did do one, Villa Park cheered ironically. He got applauded when he finally got substituted against Sunderland in that game. And at that point, he was basically the token of how bad Villa were doing. He couldn't control the ball. It felt like Villa weren't creating any chances. And since then, he's showed his maturity, but he showed that he's so tactically flexible, right? Against Arsenal, he started off the left, second half on the right. Usually he's the central number 10 as well. He can play up front as a number 9. He is so intelligent. He's so versatile. And I think those early parts of the season now show that actually he's a better player for him.
Well, after Saturday's win over Arsenal, Mikel Arteta said Aston Villa are indeed title contenders. Well, let's decide for ourselves, because we're going to rank a number of factors and see if they're actually in the conversation with Arsenal, Chelsea, and also Manchester City.
I think not quite, and that's fine, because they just haven't been at the top for quite as long as those teams. I think maybe in forward areas it does. It's probably further down the pitch where I don't think they've quite got as many options or as much versatility. Probably at fullbacks, especially in central defence, and I think that can almost be the part, especially as Jacob was saying, for a team that's been built on the defence a lot this season. They can bring players on to change games, score goals, and kind of win points that way. But I think it's probably going to be good enough to carry them through Premier League season, compete really well, and do well in the Europa League also.
I still think if they get top 6, considering how bad the summer was and the feeling, I think that might be Emery's biggest achievement. So the fact we're even talking about title potential contenders in December is quite remarkable. What I will say is they've won every game after Europa League, directly after a Europa League fixture. So that shows that they can bounce back. They're very good at only having one training session before another game, because they do a lot of analysis. And they've always been very good, actually, in balancing every European competition with Premier League. So they can do that. But like Liam says, there are tactical imbalances in that team that they will hope to rectify to some extent in January. They haven't got a right winger. Evan Gesson was the player that can kind of moonlight there, but he's going away with AFCON. Matty Cash has been one of the best right backs in Europe this season. He's the only real right back. Andres Garcia doesn't tend to play too much. Defence, they are brittle until they get a few injuries. But again, if you compare them with other teams that you've mentioned, I think in central midfield, they're arguably only Arsenal, and you saw that in the last 15 minutes, rival them really in terms of the power they have. You know, whenever Emery plays at Arsenal City, he always plays Kamara, Onana, McGinn, Tielemans, Rodgers, and that's a really powerful midfield that will take him a long way.
Okay, right, let's talk about goal scorers. I did mention Ollie Watkins, obviously. I think he's now on 3 for the season in the Premier League. He was on 1 in 13 before the Brighton game, which shows how low his goal scoring has been this season. But we look at other Premier League scorers. Marlon, 4 goals. Buendia, 4 goals. Rodgers, 3 goals. Cass, 3 goals. Watkins, as I mentioned, on 3. They've shared the goals out, but do they have a reliable enough goal scorer to carry them all the way?
Well, they do, and Ollie Watkins is back in form, right, is kind of the obvious point there. And I think kind of his creativity has been a really big asset for that team as well. You know, the fact they can have number 10s to chip in, had a really great kind of relationship with Morgan Rodgers of, you know, Watkins liking to run the channel so well and having midfielders then that can crash the box. And I think that's probably more of a strength than being purely reliant on one player. We've obviously seen this go kind of different ways where Arsenal tended to have a real kind of spread of goals. Manchester City became really reliant on Haaland and now kind of balanced back a bit because Foden's scoring more goals for them. So I think managers or coaches generally now prefer that spread of goals because if one player gets injured or they're just out of form or a team can defend them particularly well in one game, then suddenly I think you've just got way fewer avenues of attack. So I think it's probably a good thing.
Do we focus too much on the reliable goal scorer? I mean, I'll use Arsenal as a clear example just because I'm an Arsenal fan, of course, but Arsenal scored a lot of goals without Gyökeres being in the squad or Kai Havertz being in the squad. So, spreading the goals out is something I think a lot of really top coaches really look at as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it shows that it's more sustainable, I guess, than just focusing on a Haaland, for example, because if he gets injured, then where's the goals going to come from? I think this last week's been very important to Ollie Watkins. Okay, he only scored in the Brighton game, but Villa's XG is improving. They're creating more chances. That has always been, or has long been the issue. And if you look at Watkins' statistics, okay, he'd only scored 1 in 18 actually across 2 seasons, but in September, he had only 7 touches in the box. Against Brighton alone, he had 7 touches. So the fact that if they can create more for him, it'll go a long way in terms of he will get up to speed. And there's a belief from him that he will get back up to speed and hit double figures this season. You see the difference when he's not playing. So even when he's not playing well, you don't think he's playing well. Donyell Marlin's not a striker. That's another area that Villa needs to improve. Yeah, he's kind of a second forward. And Marlin's great at impact, can come on. He can act as a striker for 20 minutes. But when you expect him to drop deep, link the play, do all the type of things that Ollie Watkins is so good at, you can see his susceptibilities basically. So I expect Watkins to improve, but it has certainly been a slow start for him.
Jacob, I was reading the story about Watkins managing, I think, knee pain for basically a calendar year or a season now. What's gone on with that?
Yeah, so it kind of started swelling up after the Euros. He came back and he had a week of pre-season before the first league game, and he actually has got a cyst on his knee, and it swells. He thought they tried to, the rest in the summer, they thought they could remove it. It's come up again. So at the moment, he's kind of just managed a minute. He doesn't train all the time, and that's an issue that won't require surgery, but throughout the season it's going to require rest. So that's obviously impacted him and impacted his rhythm and form. But it's one of those that I think Emery and Villa are just trying to manage, but it's not helpful. And it's interesting really that they've gone public with this, because if Watkins was sold in the summer or even January to Arsenal or Manchester United, they would have had to inherit those problems.
All right, let's move to the defence, because we've talked about Pau Torres, was of course spoken about Tyrone Mings and Konza. A solid defence, but if you compare it to Arsenal, Manchester City, Chelsea, I would say they're quite up there.
Well, I don't know if Manchester City are up there anymore.
No, I'm saying
No. Sorry,
City have been leaking goals.
City have, and Arsenal are, I think no one's touching Arsenal, so they're kind of somewhere in between. I mean, I was really intrigued looking at some of the numbers of when they score and concede goals this season, that they finished first halves really well, scored 6 in the final 15 minutes and only conceded once. But they're really bad starters. They've conceded 5 and not scored at all in the opening 15 minutes of games, and won a lot by 1 goal. There've been a lot of kind of marginal wins. And again, it's another question for Jacob, so I apologise for putting you on the spot, but is there anything you think why they've been perhaps poor starters in games at all?
Yeah, I think ultimately both halves, they want to seek control, and a lot of the time when they're playing badly, it looks like they're quite passive. Because you saw in the first half against Leeds, actually, Emery's game plan was to keep the ball, to slow the play down. But when the other team are pressing you frantically, when they're trying to be on top of you, you actually look the team that are being passive and being quite timid. So I do think they need to improve on getting up to speed quicker and basically throwing a few punches back before they start to try and slow the game down. But what you've seen is their resilience. So I think it's the last 3 or 4 away games, when they've gone a goal behind, they've come back to win the game. It started at Spurs, you saw it against Brighton, you saw it against Leeds. So that shows that although they do have setbacks in games, they're far better at weathering storms now.
Okay, well, we've spoken about their record in the last 10 matches at least. I guess it brings me on to my next point, really, is consistency fundamentally. Since March, no team has won more Premier League games than Aston Villa's 17, which is brilliant, actually. But they can't afford another 5-game winless streak like they did at the top of the season, though. I mean, it's quite fascinating. Does this squad, because I guess this kind of brings us back to depth in many respects, and I'll start with you on this, Jacob. Is there enough depth in this squad, and they're at the level right now to remain consistent till the end of the league? Top 6 for sure, but if we're pushing, challenging, what do we think?
Ultimately, I don't think they'll be challenging for the Premier League, but they are consistent. You've seen really for 3 years, apart from that early season skid, they've been so consistent, right? Even when they have injuries, that year where they got Champions League, they had 3 ACLs, Kamara, Mings, Buendia. A lot of people don't realise that. They don't realise that the adversity they face, but they find a way to win games. There's a lot of games this season, and an XG is probably a byproduct of that, where they actually play well in a long parts of games, but in the key moments, in the key passages, they win them. So I think that their ability to be resilient and to hang in games will mean that they won't go on these skids. Okay, they won't be at the top either, but they're certainly going to be in contention for a Champions League spot.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing we haven't spoken about is the inconsistency of all the other teams around Villa as well. We look at how crowded it is in particular parts of the Premier League right now. So consistently, recently, they've been doing well, and fundamentally, that's what's made them climb to 3rd in the league.
I think so. The thing now is that with a lot of teams having really big schedules and just various teams kind of, I think, falling off a bit from their level or kind of where they're expected to be or where we anticipate them being. Even with Manchester United now, still they're kind of finding a bit of form, but it was very much the case with them and Tottenham last season. Liverpool, of course, just completely sliding down the league. So it's very much a case that the window kind of then opens up and gets a little bit bigger. Suddenly, you actually don't have to, and we're saying the same thing now for Arsenal's title challenges, that you might not need to hit 90 points to win the title, which you might have done to be runners-up in a previous season. So if Villa can kind of maintain their level, as Jacob's talking about, that might be enough, just because other teams get worse. And obviously, league form's all relative. It depends what others are doing for what you need to achieve.
I feel like I'm making the case for Villa to win the league here, Jacob, but I got to talk about their home form as well. I mean, look, no side in Europe has put together more home wins across the previous 3 years than Aston Villa. Since Arsenal's last visit in August, I think it's 2024, Villa have only been defeated twice at Villa Park, and that's by Crystal Palace. No side in Europe has put together more home wins across the previous 3 years. I've got to say that again, mate. Like, they're doing really well, and Unai Emery has kind of made that a bit of a fortress.
Emery's even had to learn the word fortress to really describe what it actually means. It's remarkable. And, Champions League nights and nights at Villa Park are always great. They get a tifos, the atmosphere is really loud, and it's very intimidating. And I think Emery's kind of game plan has been structured around home wins. Away from home, they're very controlled. They kind of are quite passive, and they feel their way into games. Out of Villa Park, they sense the moment, especially when second half, when they're kicking towards a whole end, they really try and use that atmosphere to their advantage. And again, they can beat any team in Europe at home, unless it's Crystal Palace. Those 2 games plus the FA Cup semi-final, it's Oliver Glasner's just got some sort of spell over Unai Emery. But again, the fact that they've won more games at home in Europe in 3 years just shows that there's no team really that they fear, and they'll play and they'll go toe to toe with anyone at Villa Park. Maybe not away from home, but certainly at Villa Park. And you saw that with Arsenal. And those last 15 minutes of that game, where a lot of teams would probably think, you know what, a point against league leaders is decent. Emery was rallying Emi Martinez to throw the ball quickly out, pushing for a goal. He sensed that Arsenal were tired, and with Villa attacking towards the whole end, they had that spirit. There's something intangible where they felt like, you know what, we can win this game.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the manager himself, actually. You've sort of touched on it there because Emery is up against Arteta and obviously Pep Guardiola. You recently interviewed Villa midfielder Ross Barkley, and he described Emery as one of the best managers in the world. I think we believe that, and we've actually spoken about this before. Perhaps an underrated manager by some, but I only think that's based on perhaps what he did at Arsenal and maybe PSG, but the shoes he had to fill in those teams were very, very different to the work he's doing here at Aston Villa, Jacob.
Yeah, and I think those two jobs also illuminated his weaknesses that we've discussed before in terms of he's not fantastic at managing upwards. He doesn't really care for anything outside his immediate orbit in terms of other staff and making sure that all the alignment's connected throughout the club. He's purely, I know he's got a lot of authority and sway at Villa, but he is fundamentally a head coach. At Arsenal and PSG, there were a lot more politics. He didn't have the control. He didn't have the club shaped in his image, and he didn't probably have the personality or maybe the language barrier, certainly at Arsenal, to really...
His English has got actually better since it was at Arsenal, you're right.
Absolutely. To exact his influence, where now obviously the club's been built around him. He's now got people in his support network that can kind of offset his weaknesses, can look after the things that he's not too good at, where fundamentally allows him just to be the best coach he can be. And again, I'll repeat it, pound for pound, I think he's been performing better than any other Premier League manager this season, especially after the first 5 games and how he's found solutions. And really, if you look at his CV, he might be underrated, but there's 4 Europa League titles. This could be a 5th this year. What he's done with his Villa team, Villarreal, Sevilla, he's made these a certain level of clubs maybe wanting to go into Europe, into the Champions League, and he's elevated them. And he's ultimately a head coach that makes such a difference to those type of clubs, but like Aston Villa, and probably there isn't another manager more suited than Emery to Aston Villa.
Yeah, I've always thought he's the kind of guy that needs to be a fighter as opposed to be at the top of the food chain. And actually that's where he embeds his best ideas. You think about Sevilla, you think about Villarreal as well. You think about what he's doing at Aston Villa, a bit more control, a bit more opportunity to really tweak things. That really benefits his kind of manager, doesn't it?
I think so. Someone that seems to kind of make a group almost more than the sum of its parts, if you like. And I think the real success now is how long he's been at Villa. I think he developed a reputation in some of his previous jobs of kind of capping out after kind of 1, 2, 3 seasons that, he could kind of have these almost a bit like a shock impact. His style was kind of so clear and could very quickly kind of raise the level. But it would kind of get to a couple seasons in and teams would go, oh, okay, well, we know what, this team, an Emery team wants to do. We know how they're going to play. We've played against them before, and teams get better at playing against them. And then they kind of, I think, just start to plateau. But to not see that now, I think is a real sign of success for him as well as the club. I think Villa are also in a weird spot because obviously they're historically a very big club with European trophies and silverware and success there. But, you have to go back to the very late 2000s under Martin O'Neill for when they were last finishing consecutively this high in kind of multiple back-to-back seasons. They've got back to FA Cup semi-finals now. And yeah, obviously the weird quirk of playing across all the European competitions as well, which, they've been in the Championship more recently than they've been in European football before Emery came in. So compared to where they were when they first got promoted again after quite a lengthy kind of spell in the Championship as well. I think it's outstanding success.
Okay, let's talk about January super quickly, Jacob. Fair to say the summer was quite underwhelming for Aston Villa, but what about January in the window? What were we thinking?
Emery has the final say. He's got all the power, and that means that in a single day, in a single hour, he can pivot transfer plans. So it's very difficult to anticipate what they're going to do. What they will try is they'll try and sign a striker, preferably young, or sign an attacker. Emery loves these versatile players that can play anywhere off the front or as a number 9. And then you're going to have the situation with Harvey Elliott, whether he goes back to Liverpool, whether he stays and sees the season out at Aston Villa. So there's not a huge room, but I do think if Villa are in a good spot towards the end of that January window in terms of league position, they might do similar to what they did last season. They thought, okay, we're going to try and almost gamble in a way by signing the likes of Marcus Rashford on to Sassi and Asensio, and really try and push for that Champions League. Because if they get Champions League this season, their revenues, what they can do next summer, will increase exponentially.
All right, let's talk about the supporters very quickly. I was chatting to a Villa fan on the weekend, and what a win for Aston Villa, actually. And he basically sent me this picture of his young son literally singing the Villa chant, and he was like, you know what, this kid's never seen pain. This is all he knows, Unai Emery era. Fair to say that the fans are relatively satisfied with the way the season's going right now.
Yeah, Emery's a deity in those parts, right? I think even if they're in the relegation zone, they still love him. And, I've never seen pain. As covering Aston Villa, I've been there for 3 years now. Every single year they've qualified for some sort of European competition. So it's all rosy in the garden. And I'm sure that young lad enjoyed the game as much as you, Aya.
Yeah, don't do that to me. Don't do that. All right, let's leave it there. Appreciate your time, Jacob. Also, Liam as well. And also, thank you guys for watching as well. Please make sure you like the video and also leave us a comment, and we'll be back soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.